The crystal towers of Luminar Prime sang their death song across the pale blue sky. Each note that rang from the massive structures carried pain and fear, a harmony that had never existed in the peaceful world's long history. Elder Resonance of Dawn pressed her crystalline hand against the great singing stone at the center of the capital city. Through its surface, she felt the terror of her people. The Vorthak ships hung in the sky like black metal scars, raining death upon everything below. Plasma bolts crashed into the crystal homes, turning beautiful structures into molten glass. The screams of her people mixed with the crackling of fires that spread through the city. The Lumari had lived in peace for over 10,000 years. They were beings made of living crystal, tall and graceful, who spoke through musical tones instead of words. Their world was a paradise of singing stones and light-filled caverns. They had never built weapons. They had never needed to fight. War was something they read about in old stories from distant stars, something that happened to other species in faraway places. But now war had come to them. Resonance of Dawn watched through the stone's vision as Vorthak soldiers marched through her city. The invaders were ugly creatures, short and thick, with gray skin and red eyes that glowed with hate. They wore black armor and carried weapons that shot bolts of burning energy. Wherever they went, they destroyed everything beautiful. They smashed crystal gardens and burned the singing groves. Worst of all, they captured Lumari civilians and dragged them toward their ships. The Elder knew what the Vorthak wanted. Stories had reached Luminar Prime from other worlds about this terrible empire. The Vorthak fed on the life energy of thinking beings. They would take the captured Lumari to their ships and drain them of their essence, leaving behind only empty crystal shells. It was a fate worse than death. Elder, came a musical voice from behind her. Young Harmony of Stars approached, his crystal body flickering with fear colors. The eastern districts have fallen. The Vorthak are moving toward the Great Library. What do we do? Resonance of Dawn felt her heart breaking. Her people had no weapons, no armies, no way to fight back. The Galactic Council, which was supposed to protect peaceful worlds, had done nothing. Their message requesting help had been ignored for weeks. The other civilized species were too afraid of the Vorthak to risk sending aid. "We sing our final song," she told Harmony of Stars. "We die as we lived in harmony." But even as she spoke those words, another thought crept into her mind. It was a dangerous thought, one that went against everything the Lumari believed. For thousands of years, her people had avoided contact with the species from the dark sector of the galaxy. Those worlds were home to the Deathworlders, being so violent and dangerous that civilized species refused to trade with them or even acknowledge their existence. The most feared of all Deathworlders were the humans of Terra. Stories about them were told in whispers across the galaxy. They came from a world so harsh and deadly that it had turned them into perfect killers. Their planet was covered in poison oceans and burning deserts. Massive storms raged across its surface, and radiation from their yellow star bombarded everything. Somehow these humans had not only survived such a nightmare world but had thrived on it. The few reports that existed about humans painted them as monsters. They were said to be relentless in battle, never retreating, never showing mercy. Their weapons were primitive but effective, using explosive chemicals and metal projectiles instead of the clean energy weapons that civilized species preferred. They were pack hunters who worked together to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Most terrifying of all, humans seemed to enjoy conflict. While other species fought only when necessary, humans appeared to seek out battles. They had legends about their greatest warriors and celebrated those who died in combat. The galaxy's peaceful races viewed them as barely controlled savages who would destroy everything if they were ever allowed to leave their dark sector. But now, as Resonance of Dawn watched her people being slaughtered, she found herself thinking about those savage warriors. The Vorthak were evil, but they were still a civilized species who used proper energy weapons and followed the standard rules of conquest. What would happen if they faced beings who followed no rules at all? Another explosion shook the city. Through the singing stone, the Elder saw a group of Lumari children being herded into a Vorthak transport. Their crystal bodies glowed with terror as the gray-skinned soldiers pushed them forward with their weapon butts. The sight made something snap inside Resonance of Dawn. She had lived for over 3,000 years and had always followed the path of peace. But peace had failed her people. Perhaps it was time to try something else. "Harmony of stars," she said, her voice carrying new tones of determination. "Gather the Resonance Council. Tell them to meet me at the Deep Singers." "Elder? What are you planning?" "Something that may damn us all," she replied. "Or save us." The Deep Singers were the most powerful crystal formations on Luminar Prime, buried far beneath the surface in caves that had existed since the world was young. They were connected to every singing stone on the planet and could broadcast messages across the galaxy. The Lumari used them only for the most important communications and never to contact species from the dark sector. Resonance of Dawn descended into the caverns with the 5 members of the Resonance Council. The Deep Singers rose from the cavern floor like massive trees made of pure crystal, each one humming with power. The Elder approached the largest formation and placed both hands against its surface. "What you are considering is forbidden," sang Council Member Echo of Wind. "Contact with Deathworlders has been banned for good reason. They are too dangerous." "More dangerous than extinction?" Resonance of Dawn asked. "Look around you. Our people are being murdered while we discuss ancient fears." She pressed her consciousness into the Deep Singer, feeling its vast power flow through her. The crystal formation connected to others across the planet, and through them to the quantum communication network that linked all civilized worlds. But she pushed beyond the normal boundaries, reaching toward the dark edges of known space. "Elder, please," begged Harmony of Stars. "The humans will destroy us just as surely as the Vorthak." "Perhaps," she admitted, "but the Vorthak will drain our souls and leave us as empty shells. At least the humans will give us a quick death." Resonance of Dawn gathered all her strength and sent her consciousness racing through the Deep Singer toward the dark sector. She had never attempted such a long-range communication before, and the strain was enormous. But she pushed forward, driven by the screams of her people echoing from above. Finally, she felt her signal reach the edge of human space. She had no idea how to properly communicate with such alien minds, so she simply broadcast her message in the simplest terms possible, hoping their primitive translation systems could understand. "Children of light dying. Warriors of darkness, please. Help us." The message burst from Luminar Prime and raced across the galaxy toward Terra. As it traveled through the void, Resonance of Dawn collapsed beside the Deep Singer, her crystal body flickering weakly. "Did it work?" whispered Echo of Wind. "I do not know," the Elder replied. "I have never tried to contact Deathworlders before, but if there is even a chance, they will come." Above them, the city continued to burn as the Vorthak completed their conquest. But somewhere in the darkness between the stars, a signal carried the desperate plea of a dying race toward creatures that the galaxy feared more than death itself. The Lumari could only wait and hope that their call for help would be answered before it was too late. Commander Sarah Chen was drinking her morning coffee when the universe changed forever. She sat in the command chair of the UES Retribution, a massive human dreadnought that patrolled the edge of Terran space. The ship was over 2 kilometers long and bristled with weapons that could crack planets in half. Like all human warships, it had been built to fight against impossible odds and win. Sarah was reviewing patrol reports when Lieutenant Martinez at the communication station suddenly straightened in his chair. "Commander, we're receiving an unknown signal. It's coming from outside our sector." "Put it through," Sarah ordered, setting down her coffee mug. The bridge of the Retribution was a study in controlled chaos, with dozens of crew members working at stations covered in displays and controls. The lighting was kept dim, making the various screens glow like stars in the darkness. Static filled the air, followed by a strange musical tone that made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. Then came a voice, or something like a voice, speaking words that the ship's computer had to translate. "Children of light dying. Warriors of darkness, please. Help us." The message repeated 3 times before cutting to static. Sarah stared at the communications console, trying to process what she had just heard. In over 20 years of military service, she had never received a distress call from outside human space, Martinez, where did that signal come from? The young lieutenant worked at his console for several minutes before answering. The HFY system, Commander. It's about 40 light-years from here in what the galactic maps call civilized space. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Civilized space was the term the galaxy's peaceful species used for their territory. They had made it very clear that humans and other Deathworlders were not welcome there. For over a century, humanity had been isolated in their corner of the galaxy, treated like dangerous animals that might bite if approached. Are you certain about the location? She asked. Yes, ma'am. The signal definitely came from the HFY system. According to our database, it's home to a species called the Lumari. They're described as crystalline beings who communicate through musical tones. That explained the strange quality of the message. Sarah leaned back in her chair, thinking hard. If the Lumari were asking for help, something terrible must be happening to them. The civilized species never asked Deathworlders for anything unless they were desperate. Martinez, send a coded burst to Terra Command. Mark it Priority Alpha. Include the full recording of that message. Yes, ma'am. Sarah knew that her message would reach Admiral Marcus Rodriguez within hours. What she didn't know was how it would change everything. Admiral Rodriguez was in his office at Terra Command when the priority message arrived. He was a tall man with gray hair and scars from a dozen battles. Someone who had spent his life defending humanity from threats both internal and external. The walls of his office were covered with pictures of human colonies and battle honors earned by the Terran. Defense Fleet. He listened to the Lumari, messaged 3 times before calling his staff. Together for an emergency meeting. Within an hour, the conference room was filled with the highest-ranking officers in the human military. Gentlemen, ladies, Rodriguez began. We have received a distress call from the HFY system. The message came from the Lumari, a species that has never had contact with humanity before. Captain Williams, the head of intelligence, leaned forward. Sir, our files on the Lumari indicate they're a peaceful species with no military capabilities. If they're calling for help, they must be facing something they can't handle on their own. What do we know about current threats in that region? Rodriguez asked. Williams pulled up a holographic display showing the local star systems. There have been reports of Vorthak activity in that sector. The Vorthak hegemony is an aggressive empire that conquers worlds and enslaves the populations. They're known for their cruelty. Rodriguez felt anger building in his chest. He had read reports about the Vorthak before. They were the kind of enemy that made his blood boil, beings who hurt innocents for their own gain. What's our fleet status? He asked. We have 15 dreadnoughts ready for deployment, replied Captain Torres, the fleet coordinator. Full crews, full ammunition loads. They could be ready to jump within 72 hours. Sir, interrupted Captain Williams, I have to point out that the Galactic Council has made their position clear. They don't want human intervention in civilized space. If we send ships to HFY, it could be seen as an act of aggression. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the large window that looked out over Terra's capital city. Below him, millions of humans went about their daily lives protected by the fleet he commanded. These were people who had never given up, who had fought their way off their deadly world and built an empire among the stars. They were survivors, and survivors helped other survivors. Captain Williams, he said without turning around. How many times has the Galactic Council helped us when we needed it? Never, sir. How many times have they offered to trade with us or share technology? Never, sir. How many times have they even acknowledged that we exist except to tell us to stay away from their space? Never, sir. Rodriguez turned back to face his officers. And now, for the first time in over a century, someone from civilized space is asking for our help. Not because they want to, but because they're desperate enough to contact the monsters they've spent decades avoiding. He walked back to the head of the table and placed his hands flat on its surface. I've spent my entire career protecting humanity from threats, but those people out there, those Lumari, they're facing something that could wipe them out completely. They have no weapons, no armies, no way to defend themselves. They're exactly what we would be if we weren't lucky enough to come from a world that made us strong. Captain Torres cleared her throat. Sir, what are your orders? We're going to help them, Rodriguez said firmly. Prepare Operation Shepherd's Crook. I want all 15 dreadnoughts ready for combat deployment. Full battle loads, full crew complements. We leave for HFY in 60 hours. Sir, Williams protested. The political ramifications can go to hell. Rodriguez cut him off. I don't care what the Galactic Council thinks. There are innocent people dying out there, and we have the power to save them. That's what humans do. We protect those who can't protect themselves. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Captain Torres smiled. Sir, what should I tell the crews about our mission? Rodriguez smiled back, and it was not a pleasant expression. Tell them we're going to remind the galaxy why they're afraid of Deathworlders. Within hours, the massive Terra Command facility was buzzing with activity. 15 of humanity's most powerful warships prepared for battle. Each dreadnought was over 2 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to devastate entire fleets. Their crews were the best humanity had to offer, men and women who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. The ships had names like Retribution, Apocalypse, Vengeance, and Fury. They were built for one purpose: to project human power across the galaxy and protect what humanity valued most. Now, for the first time, that protection would extend beyond human space. As the fleet prepared to depart, Rodriguez received an urgent message from the Galactic Council. The civilized species had somehow learned of humanity's plans and were demanding that the human fleet stay in their own territory. Rodriguez deleted the message without reading it all the way through. He had made his decision, and nothing would change his mind. Somewhere in the HFY system, the Lumari were fighting a losing battle against the Vorthak invasion. They had no idea that help was coming, or that the help they had requested was about to change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The age of human isolation was ending, and the Vorthak were about to learn why Earth was called a death world. The Vorthak fleet hung around Luminar Prime like a swarm of metal insects feeding on a dying flower. Over 200 ships of various sizes had taken positions throughout the HFY system, from massive battle cruisers to smaller transport vessels filled with captured Lumari prisoners. War Prime Krexthul stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devourer of Souls, watching the final stages of the conquest unfold on his tactical displays. The Lumari had put up no real resistance. Their crystalline cities had been easy to capture, and their people even easier to harvest. Soon the Vorthak energy reserves would be full, and they could move on to the next world. Krexthul was a typical Vorthak, short and thick with gray skin that looked like old leather. His red eyes glowed with satisfaction as reports came in from his commanders. The invasion was proceeding exactly as planned. War Prime, called his intelligence officer. We're detecting unusual energy signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts approaching fast. Krexthul turned toward the sensor stations. Show me. The main display changed to show the outer reaches of the HFY system. 15 large objects had just appeared out of faster-than-light travel, moving in perfect formation toward the inner planets. The sensors were having trouble getting clear readings on them. Analysis, Krexthul demanded. His tactical officer worked at his console for several minutes before responding. The ships are approximately 2 kilometers in length, War Prime. Heavy armor, multiple weapon systems. Design is unknown, but they appear to be military vessels. 2 kilometers? Krexthul laughed, a sound like grinding metal. What fools dare to challenge the Vorthak hegemony with only 15 ships? Even if they're dreadnoughts, we outnumber them more than 10 to 1. His communications officer suddenly straightened. War Prime, we're receiving a transmission from the unknown fleet. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. Put it through, Krexthul ordered, curious to hear what these newcomers had to say. A voice came through the speakers, speaking in the common galactic language. It was a calm voice, but there was something underneath it that made several Vorthak officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have one opportunity to withdraw from this system. You will not get a second. The bridge of the Devourer fell silent. Then Krexthul began to laugh again, louder than before. Terran? Did he say Terran? He turned to his intelligence officer. Bring up everything we have on this Terran Defense Fleet. The officer worked quickly, pulling up files from the Vorthak military database. War Prime, the Terrans are a species from the Dark Sector. They're classified as Deathworlders by the Galactic Council. According to our records, they're primitive fighters who use kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. Deathworlders. Krexthul slapped his armored thigh. The galaxy's pet savages have finally decided to leave their corner and play with the adults. How wonderful. Open a channel to this Admiral Rodriguez. When the connection was established, Krexthul's voice boomed across space with arrogant confidence. Foolish Deathworlders, this is War Prime Krexthul of the Vorthak hegemony. We have conquered over 1,000 worlds and enslaved 100 species. Your 15 primitive ships are nothing against our might. Turn around and crawl back to your dark sector before we decide to add your world to our collection." The response came back immediately, and this time there was no mistaking the dangerous tone in the human admiral's voice. "You have made your choice. All ships weapons free. Show them what Deathworlders can do." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for centuries to come. The 15 human dreadnoughts suddenly accelerated, moving far faster than ships of their size should have been able to. They spread out into a complex formation that the Vorthak computers couldn't analyze or predict. Instead of charging straight at the enemy fleet like primitive warriors, they moved with the calculated precision of apex predators that had been hunting together for millions of years. "All ships, open fire," Krexthul ordered. "Destroy them!" The Vorthak fleet unleashed everything it had. Hundreds of plasma lance beams streaked across space toward the human ships, enough concentrated energy to vaporize a small moon. The beams struck the human dreadnoughts and disappeared. The Vorthak officers stared at their displays in confusion. The energy readings showed that their weapons had hit their targets, but the human ships showed no damage at all. Instead, their hulls seemed to be glowing with stored energy. "What's happening?" Krexthul demanded. "Why aren't they destroyed?" His answer came in the form of 15 concentrated energy beams that lanced out from the human fleet. But these weren't the plasma lances that the Vorthak were familiar with. These beams were somehow different, more focused, more intense. They had taken the Vorthak weapon's energy and turned it into something far more deadly. The first beam struck a Vorthak cruiser amidships and sliced through it like a blade through paper. The ship's hull, which was designed to withstand plasma weapons, offered no resistance at all. The beam cut the cruiser completely in half, and both pieces exploded in brilliant fireballs. Before the Vorthak could process what they had seen, the other 14 beams found their targets. 14 more ships died in seconds, their crews never understanding what had killed them. "Impossible," Krexthul screamed. "How are they doing that?" On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Rodriguez watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The human fleet was performing exactly as he had expected. Humanity's greatest advantage had always been their ability to adapt and overcome. "Energy absorption holding steady across all ships," reported his tactical officer. "We're converting their plasma weapons into focused beam output at 93% efficiency." Rodriguez nodded. The adaptive shield technology had been developed on Earth, where constant bombardment from solar radiation had forced humanity to learn how to absorb and redirect energy. What had started as protection against their own sun's fury had become the most advanced defensive system in the galaxy. "Target their command ships," Rodriguez ordered. "Let's cut off the head of this snake." The human dreadnoughts moved through the Vorthak fleet like sharks through a school of fish. Their adaptive shields absorbed every energy weapon fired at them and converted it into fuel for their own beam weapons. The more the Vorthak shot at them, the more powerful the humans became. But the energy redirection was only one part of humanity's advantage. The other part was something the Vorthak couldn't understand because they had never faced it before: tactical flexibility. The Vorthak fought like most civilized species, with rigid formations and predictable strategies. They had rules for space combat that had been developed over thousands of years by peaceful races. But humans had learned to fight on a world where the rules changed every day, where survival meant adapting faster than the next predator. Captain Elena Vasquez of the UES Apocalypse demonstrated this when a group of Vorthak ships tried to surround her vessel. Instead of following standard fleet protocols, she did something that no civilized species would ever consider. She rammed them. The Apocalypse's hull was designed to survive impacts with asteroids and debris from Earth's violent asteroid belt. When it struck the first Vorthak ship at full speed, the enemy vessel crumpled like paper while the human dreadnought barely showed a scratch. "Ma'am," called her tactical officer, "you just violated 17 different galactic conventions on civilized warfare." Vasquez smiled coldly. "Good thing we're not civilized." Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human captains threw out the rulebook and fought like the predators their world had made them. They used ramming attacks, point-blank range weapons fire, and tactics that the Vorthak computers couldn't predict because no civilized species had ever used them before. The Vorthak fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just minutes before, began to crumble under the human assault. Ships that had conquered worlds across the galaxy found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by vessels they had dismissed as primitive. War Prime Krextel watched, his proud fleet being systematically destroyed, and felt something he had never experienced before: true fear. These weren't the primitive savages his intelligence reports had described. These were something far worse. These were predators that had evolved on a world so deadly that it had turned them into the perfect killing machines, and they were just getting started. In the crystal caverns beneath Luminar Prime, Elder Resonance of Dawn felt the battle raging above through the planet's singing stones. Each explosion in space sent vibrations through the quantum field that connected all crystalline matter on her world. But these weren't the harsh, destructive vibrations of Vorthak weapons. These were different, controlled, precise, and somehow angry. "Elder," whispered Harmony of Stars, "something has changed. The Vorthak signals are afraid." Above them, the true nature of human warfare was revealing itself to the galaxy. War Prime Krextel had lost over 60 ships in less than 30 minutes. His remaining fleet was in chaos, with captains screaming contradictory orders over the communication channels. The humans had done something that should have been impossible. They had made the Vorthak afraid. "Pull back to defensive formation 7. Krextel commanded. "Group around the command ships and concentrate our fire." But even as he gave the order, he realized it was useless. The humans weren't following any formation or strategy that the Vorthak computers could understand. They moved like a pack of wild animals, each ship knowing exactly where the others would be without any visible communication. Captain Marcus Webb of the UES. Fury was proving this point as he led his dreadnought through a series of maneuvers that defied conventional space combat tactics. His ship rolled and twisted through the enemy formation, its weapons firing in directions that seemed random but somehow always found their targets. "How are they coordinating like this?" his tactical officer asked in amazement. "We're not using any standard formation patterns," Webb smiled grimly. "We're not using formations at all, son. We're hunting." That was the key difference that the Vorthak couldn't grasp. They fought like an army, with rigid command structures and predetermined battle plans. But humans fought like predators, using instincts developed over millions of years of evolution. Each captain knew where his fellow hunters would be, because pack hunting was encoded in their very DNA. The UES Vengeance, commanded by Captain Lisa Nakamura, demonstrated this when she found herself facing 5 Vorthak cruisers at once. Instead of retreating or calling for backup, she did something that made the enemy captains freeze in confusion. She turned off her engines and began to drift. "Is their ship disabled?" asked the Vorthak squadron leader. "Sensors show no damage," replied his tactical officer. "But they've stopped accelerating. They're just floating." The Vorthak ships moved in for an easy kill, focusing all their weapons on what appeared to be a helpless target. Their plasma lances struck the Vengeance repeatedly, and the ship's adaptive shields absorbed every joule of energy. That's when Captain Nakamura sprang her trap. "All power to engines now," she commanded. The Vengeance suddenly blazed to life, accelerating directly toward the center of the Vorthak formation at maximum velocity. But instead of trying to ram them, she executed a maneuver that human pilots called threading the needle. Her ship passed between 2 Vorthak cruisers with less than 50 meters of clearance on either side. As she did, the Vengeance's weapon systems fired at point-blank range, completely destroying both enemy vessels. The remaining 3 Vorthak ships, caught off guard by the sudden attack, crashed into each other as they tried to avoid the wreckage. It was a maneuver that required split-second timing and absolute precision. Any mistake would have resulted in the destruction of the human ship. But humans had learned to hunt on a world where one mistake meant death, and Captain Nakamura had made no mistakes. Across the battlefield, similar displays of human adaptability were destroying the Vorthak fleet. But the most terrifying demonstration came from Captain Elena Vasquez aboard the UES Apocalypse. Vasquez had been watching the enemy fleet's movements, and she had noticed something that gave her an idea. The Vorthak ships were powered by large energy cores that glowed brightly enough to be seen from the outside. If those cores were damaged, the ships would lose power and become helpless. But the cores were heavily protected inside each ship's hull. There was no way to hit them with conventional weapons unless you got creative. "Helm," Vasquez ordered. "Bring us alongside that battlecruiser, close enough to touch." Her crew looked at her as if she had lost her mind, but they followed orders. The Apocalypse moved to within meters of a massive Vorthak warship, so close that the two hulls were almost touching. "Ma'am," called her weapons officer, "at this range, our beam weapons could damage our own ship." "Who said anything about beam weapons?" Vasquez replied with a dangerous smile. "Launch boarding torpedoes." The boarding torpedo was a human invention that most civilized species considered barbaric. It was exactly what it sounded, like a armored tube filled with soldiers that could punch through an enemy ship's hull and deliver troops directly into the target vessel. But Vasquez wasn't planning to board the Vorthak ship. She had something else in mind. "Load Torpedo Bay 3 with a fusion warhead," she commanded. "Set it for proximity detonation." Now her crew understood. They were going to fire a nuclear weapon directly into the enemy ship's hull at point-blank range. It was insane, suicidal, and completely against every rule of civilized warfare. It was also brilliant. The boarding torpedo punched through the Vorthak ship's armor like it was tissue paper. A few seconds later, the fusion warhead detonated inside the enemy vessel's hull, turning the entire ship into expanding gas and debris. The explosion was so close to the Apocalypse that the human ship's shields flared white-hot, but the adaptive technology held. Vasquez had just proven that humans could survive their own nuclear weapons at close range while using them to destroy enemies. War Prime. Krexthal watched this display of controlled madness and finally understood what his fleet was facing. These weren't civilized beings following the rules of proper warfare. These were apex predators from a world so dangerous that it had taught them to weaponize everything, including their own deaths. "All ships retreat," he commanded. "Full reverse maximum speed." But it was too late. The human ships had cut off every escape route. They had surrounded the Vorthak fleet without anyone noticing, moving with the patience of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Admiral Rodriguez watched the tactical display from the bridge of the Retribution and felt a grim satisfaction. The Vorthak were learning the most important lesson about humans. They weren't just warriors, they were predators. And predators didn't let their prey escape. "Open a channel to the Vorthak fleet," he ordered. When the connection was established, Rodriguez's voice carried across space with the absolute certainty of someone who held all the cards. "War Prime Krexthal, you have two choices. Surrender immediately and release all Lumari prisoners or watch your entire fleet die. You have 60 seconds to decide." On the bridge of the Devourer of Souls, Krexthal stared at his tactical display in despair. He had started the day with over 200 ships and complete control of the Kethvar system. Now he had less than half his fleet left, and they were completely surrounded by 15 human dreadnoughts that had proven they could destroy his ships at will. For the first time in his long military career, the War Prime of the Vorthak hegemony was faced with the possibility of total defeat, and the beings who had defeated him weren't even breathing hard. The countdown timer showed 30 seconds remaining. In the crystal caverns below, Elder Resonance of Dawn felt something she had never experienced before: hope. The warriors of darkness had come just as she had prayed, but they weren't the mindless savages that the galaxy feared. They were something far more terrifying. They were protectors with the power to back up their promises, and they had come to save her people. The silence in space was broken only by the hum of ship engines and the whispered prayers of dying Vorthak officers. War Prime Krexthal stared at the countdown timer on his display as it reached 10 seconds. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders that he couldn't give. 5 seconds. 4. 3. "We surrender," Krexthal whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sir?" asked his communications officer. "We surrender," the War Prime shouted, his voice cracking with defeat and rage. "Broadcast our surrender on all frequencies. Order all ships to power down weapons and prepare to release prisoners." Across the Vorthak fleet, ships that had conquered worlds and enslaved entire species began shutting down their weapons systems. For the first time in their empire's history, a Vorthak fleet was surrendering without being completely destroyed. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Rodriguez accepted the surrender with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the battle. But inside, he felt a deep satisfaction. The galaxy was about to learn that humans weren't just skilled at destruction. They were also capable of mercy when it was earned. "All ships, stand down from combat status but maintain defensive positions," Rodriguez ordered. Prepare boarding teams for prisoner transfer operations. Within hours, the human fleet had taken control of the situation in the Kethvar system. The Vorthak ships were secured, and their prisoners were being transferred back to the surface of Luminar Prime. The humans worked with efficient precision, but also with a gentleness that surprised everyone who witnessed it. Captain Sarah Chen of the Retribution led the first contact team to the surface. She had volunteered for the dangerous mission of meeting the Lumari face-to-face, not knowing how the crystalline beings would react to seeing actual humans. The landing party consisted of 12 humans in full combat armor, but they carried medical supplies instead of weapons. They had landed in the main plaza of the Crystal City, where hundreds of Lumari had gathered to see their rescuers. Chen removed her helmet and looked around at the assembled crowd. The Lumari were even more beautiful than the intelligence reports had suggested. They were tall and graceful, their crystal bodies refracting light in patterns that created rainbows in the air around them. But she could also see the damage that the Vorthak had caused. Broken crystal structures, scorch marks from energy weapons, and worst of all, the empty shells of Lumari who had been drained of their life energy. "I am Captain Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet," she said, hoping the translation systems would work. "We received your call for help." A path opened through the crowd and Elder Resonance of Dawn approached. The ancient Lumari moved slowly, her crystal body flickering with patterns of light that the human translator identified as complex emotions. "You came," the Elder sang, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The warriors of darkness heard our call and came to save us." Chen felt her throat tighten with emotion. "We're not warriors of darkness, Elder. We're just people who believe that innocents shouldn't suffer when we have the power to help them." Resonance of Dawn studied the human captain with eyes that had seen 3,000 years of galactic history. These Deathworlders didn't look like the monsters the galaxy had described. They looked kind. "Your ships destroyed the Vorthak fleet," the Elder observed. "We felt their terror even in our deep caves. They fear you more than they have ever feared anything." "Good," Chen replied firmly. "Fear keeps monsters in line. But you don't need to fear us. We came here to protect you, not to conquer you." Over the following days, something unprecedented happened in the galaxy. The human fleet didn't leave after their victory. Instead, they stayed to help with the reconstruction efforts. Human engineers worked alongside Lumari artisans to repair the crystal cities. Human doctors shared their medical knowledge to help treat the wounded. Human soldiers handed out food and supplies to refugee families. The galaxy watched in amazement as the feared Deathworlders revealed their true nature. They weren't mindless savages or cruel conquerors. They were protectors who had been shaped by their harsh world into the perfect guardians for those who couldn't guard themselves. Elder Resonance of Dawn spent hours talking with Admiral Rodriguez, sharing the history of her people and learning about the humans who had saved them. What she discovered changed her understanding of the galaxy forever. "Your world sounds terrible," she said as they walked through the crystal gardens that human engineers were helping to rebuild. "How did you survive such a harsh place?" Rodriguez smiled sadly. "By learning that we were stronger together than we were alone. Earth taught us that the universe is dangerous and unforgiving, but it also taught us that we could protect each other if we were willing to fight for what mattered." "And what matters to you?" "The same thing that matters to you, Elder, our families, our children, our friends. The right of innocent people to live their lives without fear." Resonance of Dawn stopped walking and turned to face the human admiral. "We searched the cosmic frequencies for decades, looking for warriors strong enough to protect the innocent. We never expected to find shepherds who carry darkness so that others might live in light." Those words would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. The Lumari Elder had found the perfect description for humanity. Shepherds of the dark, protectors who had embraced their own harsh nature so that others wouldn't have to. News of the battle spread throughout civilized space at faster-than-light speeds. The Galactic Council met in emergency session to discuss the implications of human intervention. Some species demanded that the humans be punished for violating galactic sovereignty. Others quietly began drafting requests for protection. The Vorthak Empire, meanwhile, was in chaos. Word of their fleet's defeat had reached the homeworld, and for the first time in their history they were afraid. Their entire military doctrine was based on intimidation and overwhelming force. But what good was intimidation? against beings who could absorb their most powerful weapons and turn that energy against them. Within a week of the battle, 3 more species had sent secret messages to human space, asking for protection against various threats. The humans responded by deploying small fleets to defensive positions around the requesting worlds. But they made it clear that protection came with expectations. Admiral Rodriguez established what became known as the Terran Protection Doctrine. Any world that requested human protection would receive it, but they had to agree to certain conditions. They could not start aggressive wars. They could not enslave other species. They had to treat refugees and prisoners with dignity. Most importantly, they had to contribute to their own defense through whatever means they could. The Lumari became the first species to sign a formal protection agreement with humanity. In exchange for human military protection, they shared their crystal technology and their deep understanding of quantum communication networks. The alliance benefited both species and became a model for future agreements. Captain Elena Vasquez of the UES Apocalypse was assigned to permanent patrol duty in the Kethavar system. Her ship became a familiar sight in the skies over Luminar Prime, a symbol of safety that allowed the crystal beings to rebuild their civilization without fear. Other human ships took up similar positions around a growing number of worlds. The galaxy's map began to show a new reality. Systems marked with the symbol of Terran protection, where aggressive species knew better than to attack. The Vorthak tested this protection once, sending a small fleet to raid a world under human guardianship. The raid lasted exactly 17 minutes before the attacking force was completely destroyed by a human patrol ship. After that, even the mention of Terran-protected space was enough to make aggressive species look for easier targets. But the most important change was in how the galaxy saw humanity. The stories of savage Deathworlders were gradually replaced by new tales. Stories of human ships arriving just in time to save colonies from pirate raids, of human doctors working around the clock to stop plague outbreaks, of human engineers sharing technology that improved life for millions of beings. The transformation wasn't complete or universal. Some species still feared and resented human power. The Galactic Council still refused to officially recognize humanity's role as protector of the innocent. But for the first time in over a century, humans were no longer alone in their corner of the galaxy. They had become what they were always meant to be, shepherds of the dark, guardians who carried the strength of their harsh world into the light so that others could live in peace. In the crystal caverns beneath Luminar Prime, Elder Resonance of Dawn composed a new song. It was a song of gratitude, but also of hope. She sang about warriors who came from darkness but brought light, about shepherds who protected the innocent, and about the day when the galaxy learned that sometimes the most feared predators make the most devoted protectors. The song spread through the quantum communication network, carrying her message to every world where beings gathered around their fires and told stories to their children. It became a legend that would be remembered long after the last crystal tower fell and the last human ship returned to Earth. The galaxy had learned to fear the Deathworlders. Now it was learning to love them. And in the dark void between the stars, human ships continued their eternal patrol, watching over worlds they had never seen before but had sworn to protect, carrying the darkness so that others could live in light.